Does anybody have any questions before we begin? If not, I will proceed. Okay, so today we're talking about Sagittarius, Jupiter, and the ninth house. All in all, we are going to be discussing, the little tidbits, but, essentially we're trying to understand what the essence of Sagittarius brings with it. And it brings with it Jupiter, it brings with it the ninth house. So, not that all of these things are combined, but it's nice to know that these things are connected in some way and integrated in some way. So, the sign of Sagittarius really represents the need to fulfill a higher purpose. And to experience the outer edges of oneself. So, that kind of, as we'll talk about later, lends to someone who is really leaning into taking experiences and risk and really trying to look as far as possible until there's actually no ground left. And then that's the boundary. That's the boundary for them. And then if something were to grow outside of that, then that boundary could be extended. So Jupiter is the planet of extremes. So when we look at Jupiter in a chart and the sign that it's in, we can know, okay, there's going to be extremes around that or those types of behaviors or processes with the sign. So it brings really great triumphs. A lot of people say it's the great benefic. It's very positive and ambitious and has, all of these positive attributes. But what I think a lot of people don't mention because, negative connotations in astrology can bring one to like not want to trust it. But it really has to do with the fact that, you can't have good without evil. You can't have balance in life without, having both experiences of the extreme. So this great extreme of triumph and having, money befall you or good fortune, you will always experience the opposite of that as well, which is, disappointment and things kind of going awry. So it's the planet that encourages us to explore our boundaries of human existence. We'll talk about that more later, but the boundaries of human existence means, how do the people in India live? How do indigenous people live? How do people in different cultures believe in religion or believe that, their way of life is a good way of life? So that's basically what the exploration is learning to accept and tolerate and understand people that are different or some people that they don't really know too much about. In the ninth house, it's or excuse me, with Jupiter, it's where we trust or deeply believe in a higher experience in life. So, generally this planet will enliven us to change our belief systems, to believe more deeply in something so that we go towards it. And that way we kind of change the threshold of our lives, and we play with the mundane and the divine with Jupiter. So the mundane meaning just the day-to-day normal functions of life, where we're dealing with our family and we're going to work. But then also realizing divinity within that process. And, there is a connection with Virgo here where there is a deep need to, with Jupiter, get really right with our routines and do that at a higher level with Jupiter and Sagittarius. So, there's we start to look at charts of Sagittarians, they kind of have this very Virgo-esque connection, and we'll look at that later because they're mutable signs. So they're married in some way. They're wanting to improve function, and so that's what Sagittarius and Jupiter are trying to do, is to kind of create that balance between the mundane and the divine, having a spiritual life, having a life where you chop wood and carry water, that type of thing. And then the ninth house. The ninth house represents the place where we want to really elevate ourselves to a point where we feel like a master, where we have, you know, insights and knowledge that, you know, maybe isn't visible to everybody else, but is very apparent to us and our belief systems. And it's a place where we take our purpose to the next step. So a lot of people, when they're having transits through the ninth house, or if they have planets there, they're either really geared towards needing to self-educate, which means going out and shooting that arrow and looking for this new experience of life, and also bringing to manifestation like this physical representation. So that's why all of these symbols, Sagittarius, Jupiter, ninth house, can represent authorship and physical paper. And so usually these people are dealing with that kind of medium, either working in print shops or, you know, preserving books and those types of things. So Sagittarius is a fire sign. It's mutable. And, you know, we remember that fire is the element of excitement and motivation and having confidence, and that spark to live another day, to feel motivated to create something new, to be a part of something, to just expand what it means to be human with Sagittarius. The mutable mode of operation makes them very flexible. They're able to change their plans and be spontaneous. Of course, we're talking about problem solvers. We're talking about people who are personally directed in life. They don't really allow anybody to take that direction for them. And, you know, there's a larger meaning to life with the mutable signs. Now, when we look at the symbol of the centaur, it's half human, half horse. So, you know, if we think about, you know, kind of what that kind of being would be connected to, you could think, well, the upper body from the torso to the head is this human experience. It has digestion, normal digestion. It probably wouldn't have any of the sexual organs. However, you know, it would have, you know, upward mobility, able to use the hands, and the mental capacity is large when we're thinking about the animal world and the human world. Now, our ability to have intellect is what makes us human, and to stand upright. So this ability from below the waist down, from the buttocks down, there's this connection to the natural world, the world that's not controlled by man, the natural world that's created, you know, just like we are. We don't know how we were brought here down on this earth. We're just sentient beings, and so there's this connection to intuition and innate instincts. When we think of a horse's body, it's fast, it's agile. And so these people tend to have very strong legs, very can get really tight hips and back pain if they're not mutable and mobile. So walking, running are good ways to strengthen the buttocks and the hips. And that's why Sagittarius represents the hips in particular. So the centaur or the archer is another form or another word that we call Sagittarius, and it really means to be a marksman, to really, you know, be at the last stages of, wow, I don't really know if I'm going to hit the mark, but I'm going to try. And, you know, through trial and tribulation, through trial and error, eventually, you know, if you keep going towards that target, you do achieve it. No matter how long it takes, as long as you keep going with it. So that's what Sagittarius is bringing to the table. That's what Jupiter brings, is that extreme to never stop, to never allow someone to say no. So this mutable energy, we think of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces when we're talking about the mutable signs. And so these signs need to create an opportunity for themselves, Sagittarius in particular, because if we look at the astrological wheel here, we'll notice that this sign, Sagittarius, is the last fire sign until we get to Aries. So we've got to wait actually a long time. This fire, we have to try to keep it burning throughout the winter so that we will survive until spring. So there's a heavy need to understand what will keep one going, what will give them meaning so that they will want to wake up in the morning and provide that. Because the mutable signs are service oriented. They want to involve themselves in the reality of the world as it's moving and changing. And so they want to help manage resources and cooperate with the way things are going. Um, when we are in our most flexible points of life, we are in higher education or early education when our minds and our brains are still pretty malleable. This is, the expression of moving around our neighborhoods and extending ourselves to larger, vaster lands where we are learning about not only ourselves, Gemini, and our neighbors, but with Sagittarius, we're learning about all the other cultures that exist. And we're learning about different belief systems and ideologies because, what's life if we're only having a singular experience or a singular point of view? So with fire signs, we have Aries, Leo, and Sag. And you'll see these people, they will always live off the beaten path. When I think of Sagittarius, I think of the word wild. That is the word for me because there is a level of, there's the centaur, this human, this half horse, this person who's actually quite different than the rest. They're willing to take a risk. They're willing to run free. They're willing to live in the wilderness and to work with the nature that's around them. I mean, these people, these Sagittarians, will have all of these qualities that are a little different than just a Leo and Aries. The Sagittarius really brings together all of the fire. So it's the highest point of the fire signs. So Aries is the beginning, they are developing themselves. And I'm not saying that they are not evolved or that they are below. I'm just saying that if we look at particular elemental aspects, we can notice that each one is offering something different. And the third one, or the very last one, is the most extreme of them all. And so Sagittarius brings that loud, that boisterous, let's not let the party end. Let's extend things. Let's tease out the risk. Let's see that life is possible, that anything is possible. And so they're very bright, energetic, playful people, generally have a great sense of humor. And so when I think of Sagittarius, I think of the highest form of truth and service. I say that because, if you look at this archetype, there's part of this animal that is service oriented, which is the horse, which is the one who you can get on their backs and they will take you to these vast lands for longer periods of time than a human would, and faster than a human would be able to. And, with a human existence, we're always looking for what's right, what's true, what's just. and that's why we have so many belief systems and ideologies that go around, because we're all looking for some greater connection, somebody or something to tell us that um, there's a life outside of us. So um, when we think of the archer, it's the focusing of one's sight, and looking at the risks and having this really ultimate rich experience with taking those risks and feeling that it's okay, because there's a level of trust and faith that's kind of in there. um, and maybe competence as well. I think Sagittarius does represent kind of this higher form of confidence, whereas Leos kind of can pretend as if they have this level of self-confidence, but they're still trying to develop it. In Sagittarius, it's very refined. And so because it's, like I said, that last sign of fire sign of the zodiac, it can be extreme, and it can have a lot of um, layers to it. And as we'll learn, Sagittarians love to layer their life with different things, making sure that they have explored many different aspects, all the different corners of the world. Um, so, one interesting thing that I saw in Stephen Forrest's books, The Inner Sky. It's a pretty good book. It's pretty straightforward and to the point. But I thought it was really cool that he mentioned that ancient astrologers believed that there was three archetypes to the Sagittarius. One was the gypsy, two was the scholar, and three was the philosopher. I couldn't find any other literature that supported his evidence on this, so I just said, Stephen Forrest said it. He's an evolutionary astrologer. So I don't know, maybe we can look into that. But as we go through the slides, I'll show you kind of how we can kind of think about that a little bit. So Sagittarius is the experience of ultimate freedom, freedom of the mind, freedom of the body, freedom of choice, and all opportunities. Um, these people can stagnate when they're confined, when they don't have access to, being able to get into a car, a boat, a plane, anywhere to get movement. Their light dims. So, one way to really enliven a Sagittarius is to stimulate themselves with travel and bringing a different level of awareness to maybe travel or go or experience something somewhere else that maybe you'd like to learn about. And these people, because they are a constant student, they're a constant gypsy, they're constantly philosophizing or philosoph. That's not a good word for me to use because I can't say it very well. But they can be philosophical. And so, having these experiences kind of stimulates all of those parts of who they are. Um, they're ambitious, like I said, and positive, energetic. They can be overconfident, and they can easily bore, easily, be turned off by a situation if it's not kind of higher, higherly, has more of a higher mental function with it. And so, like we talked about, they direct their own destiny and their life the way they see fit, and it's really under no uncertain terms. So, they are not the type of people who will follow rules that actually don't work, or I've seen a lot of defying authority figures, um, because it's hard to tell a Sagittarius what to do. At a certain level they have this wisdom, this kind of inner guidance that tells them what's right, and they were kind of born with this knowing. So Sagittarius really represents the word I know, because essentially there's some part in them that they do. um, and so that's kind of why they're not able to these are entrepreneurs of our chart. Most fire signs can be that way because they need to direct their own symphony, their own day-to-day life. It's not easy, but you know, if they are marksmen and they try their best and they keep, pulling back the arrow and keep trying over and over, eventually they'll hit the bullseye. So we've got the gypsy, the traveler. Sagittarius represents movement across bodies of water, actually. So, with Gemini, when we're moving around our cities, we are using city transit and bikes and our feet. We're getting from point A to point B, a couple miles radius. When we're stepping into Sagittarian territory, we're going to different towns and different cities and states and countries because what we're trying to do is get further and further away from what we know so that we can expand that which we want to know. And so when we're moving, when we're in this flux of going with the flow of life and going to visit people and have new experiences, we become a student. We become a person who is geared towards finding out the full scope. What's the full story of this? Like, I have this view and I need you to prove me wrong. So tell me your customs. Let me read your books. Let me look at the maps. And so Sagittarius will also represent mapping. And so, after the student, comes back home and they settle down and they've really kind of changed their belief system because they've had this kind of transformational experience with learning from others. Now they become the philosopher. They become the people that say, hey, are you having a hard time? Well, I had this experience and these people taught me that this was a good way of doing this. And so how about I show you? And there's books and materials and resources that this philosopher can give to others so that they can experience the outer edges of a human existence. And so that's why this sign also represents documentaries and learning about others in that way. So when we're thinking about Jupiter and Sagittarius, there's, like I said, a level of deep self-knowledge because they are pushing the limits and forcing themselves to encounter their fears around power, around purpose, around anything. And if they're unwilling to start something, it's generally because there's a good level of fear. I feel nervous to start. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I don't know if I can do this again. When you keep repeating the process over and over, there's laws of odds and all of those things. But, for the most part, what they're trying to achieve is a heightened sense of aliveness in life. Living on the edge, it kind of sharpens your senses. It keeps you present. And everything feels more vivid, more real, more meaningful. So that's why I say these people are connected to nature. These are the people that are willing to go on the hiking trips and sleep in a tent and, wear their bug spray and their natural materials so that they stay warm. This gives, feeling the different temperatures on the skin is something that's very good for Sagittarius. Being able to walk in that brisk, cold air, and then having the contrast of spring. I mean, those weather extremes can really boost them up and make them go, wow, life is happening outside of me. And so they have a freedom from convention. When you step outside of what society thinks that you should do, and their expectations, you're giving yourself the freedom to define your life on your own terms. And it's scary when you do that. There's no certainty there. So that's why it can be quite risky. There's a deep level of legacy and impact when it comes to these signatures. Because these extremes in life, they mark you. They leave a scar. You gather trinkets and tchotchkes and stickers and crystals and all of these artifacts that you bring back with you, they leave a mark. And, you know, it has kind of like this ripple effect of, okay, well, I've had this experience. How do I materialize that? How do I tell other people what this experience can be? And so, a level of leadership starts to spark up and inspiration. And Jupiter can really bring this to kind of, depending on where it is in your chart, can really, really be highlighted. Um, you know, this is a very Pluto quote. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because, I want us to remember that the eighth house, Pluto, the last class that we had, and we talked about, kind of the hardships that we have to go through as human beings. What Sagittarius is here to say is, I've already experienced the Scorpio. I know that life is hard. I know things could actually be worse, which is why I'm willing to take the risk to see if I can make something work. And so confronting, the raw truths of who you are, when you are searching and seeking for other forms of knowledge, you realize where you're limited in your knowledge and where you need to expand your own viewpoint of who you are and what you're doing with your life. And so that can awaken change. I do think that the change comes about through all the different planetary cycles and depending on where it is in your chart. But I thought it was important to remember that, Jupiter and Sagittarius is so close to Scorpio and Pluto, and it's almost like you can't have one without the other. And Sagittarius is like, I'm gonna live. And Pluto's like, Scorpio's like, I'm gonna live too, but I'm gonna die first. I'm gonna see what that death feels like first. And then when I come back, I'm gonna skyrocket. So, Jupiter, it's the planet of blessings, of positivity and extreme situations, like we talked about. It's the learning of truth through having a raw, genuine, authentic experience of life. Jupiter brings the ability to see faith and to have hope in our lives. It can represent wisdom and knowledge. Depending on what sign it is kind of where that knowledge and wisdom would be around. It wouldn't be around everything, but it's the planet of no limits, It's the planet of how far can I get before someone tells me no? The planet of, yeah, we talked about that, knowing how far you can go. So Jupiter will spend a year in each sign. So it will take roughly 12, almost 13 years sometimes to make a full revolution and bring itself back to the same place. So if you're having a Jupiter return, this will happen every 12 years. And it can be significant for all of us, of course, but Sagittarians in particular will have to pay attention to Jupiter because that is their ruling planet. So Jupiter is usually always playing a big factor in how they've shaped their beliefs and developed themselves because of their placement there. When it comes to Jupiter, it will spend, yes, 1 year in each sign. And I think that's all I have to say about that. So the ninth house. The ninth house is the house of wide expanse. It's, it's not only traveling to vast lands, but really extending the function of one's life so that we are stable enough to be flexible, if that can be a thing. When you want to live a wild life, when you want to live on the outer edges and stay in that way, you have to live your life in a way that supports that. And so, you have to be organized still, And so there's this representation of physical papers, of publishing and filing documents, and receiving a diploma, and showing your credentials through paper. Um, it's the house of travel, going overseas, traveling to the vast lands, or even living a nomadic lifestyle for some time. So if Jupiter is passing over your ninth house, I can attest I lived a very gypsy lifestyle when Jupiter was transiting my ninth house, and almost didn't end until it got into my 10th house. So it was maybe about 2 or 3 years of just kind of like uncertainty, moving back and forth and needing to be flexible, which is hard because I'm a fixed person. Um, so, there was a lot of taking risks and, um, really needing to experience life on a different term, something that looked completely new. So, the ninth house, when we have planets transiting this area, it's a time for schooling, taking in new information and diverse teachings. Um, it's to deepen the connection with nature and the divine through immersing yourself in different environments, different ideologies, different forms of thinking and practices, spiritual practices. Um, and to have like this very open experience of people, of different cultures, so that you can have this experience of shifted consciousness, when it's very refreshing to learn about how other people are living and how you can kind of bring that to yourself. So when we're thinking about the ninth house and we're having transits there, we can want to take ourselves to different places, go through pilgrimages, create rituals, have things in our lives that create spiritual experiences and significance. So the ninth house is a pretty powerful house, and working with it can be pretty serendipitous. So if we look at polarity, um, with Gemini, information is changing and it's developing all the time. What's new is what they say, what's changing, what's in the news. And so when we think about um, information and kind of how that flows through us, when we come to Sagittarius, there's a need for staying power. We can't learn a subject, like you couldn't learn to be a doctor and for that curriculum to be changing every month or every night at 5 p.m. You know what I mean? There's got to be some level of, okay, well, what's true? What will hold? What information will hold so that we can put that in a book and students can use that information. So there's a differing level of needing to know. So Gemini will need to know more information. They need to know the details, not for themselves, just to feel more informed. But they may not particularly do anything with that information. They might tell other people, if it's an educational bit, they may or may not implement that thing that they're being taught. But with Sagittarius, it is. It's less about taking in that information and letting it go. Okay, well, how do I take meaning out of this thing and make it work for me? So, with Gemini, there's a need for beliefs to be reshaped often, um, for the level of knowledge to increase, for more levels of development to keep progressing. And, Sagittarius is really connected to a kind of like a historical knowledge. They're wanting to know about all of the different cultures and what has kind of lasted through the test of time in terms of information. And what the truth of the matter is, the truth of the story, what we believe, no matter, you know, what is true. And that's kind of a hard question, what do we all believe in? And people argue, and whether it be love or you know, put any word there, and we all will have a different belief about it, based on where we live, based on our Gemini, where our culture is, where we're located on the map, our cities and small places. Um, and Sagittarius will help, include not only the stuff that's kind of new and passing through, but things that we can rely on for a longer period of time. Um, Sagittarius can represent graduating college or be like we talked about, becoming the scholar, but also a focused or specialized area of study. So something that's maybe technically oriented, um, specifically aligned with one particular thought process. Like you wouldn't go to a university and take all of the base classes. It would be, I'm taking a certificate to be a massage therapist or that type of thing. So we've got the polarities with the planets too. So Mercury is intaking information and the perception of life that you carry based on what your reality is showing you. And, words become things, after a while of repeating the same thing, they become beliefs. They eventually become a Jupiter. And, sometimes, they can, we can be manipulated and, things cannot be true. Things that we've believed for a long time, and then we realize that wasn't a true story. It's kind of deflating. And Jupiter can remind us of that, like, oh, yeah, there was a limit to the truth of that. And yeah. So Mercury can represent, the need to express oneself, and the perspective of the world in front of you. How do you disseminate information to others? How do you take in information? How do you learn? That's all of the mental and mind function. But Jupiter is bringing, something else. It's saying, yeah, we have this information, but I want to make things bigger. I want to blow out the details. I want to know the deeper, more spiritual connections to the information that I'm being given. So, where's the spirituality? Where's the connection to the animal world? Um, where can we invest more in knowing about a particular subject instead of the vast expanse of all different things? So when we think about Gemini or Mercury, we can think about knowing a lot of things, a lot of different things, about a bunch of different subjects, but only a little bit in each one of those. And Jupiter is saying, okay, I need you to focus here and let's just expand this area, and you need to leave the rest of that because we need to explore this. And I think one of you is unmuted. Thank you, Deborah. Okay. So places, places in our chart when we are in the ninth house, we are, exercising our ideas. We're practicing. We might dabble here and there. You might say, if you were someone who just learned tarot, you might be, giving some readings here. You might be trying to understand the limits of what you can tell people. And the ninth house is where you're learning to become a teacher. So while you might be taking classes and such, there's this level of, when I leave this, I've got to give it to somebody. I've got to do something with it past me. And we did talk about the ninth house of being traveling to great lands and finding religious or spiritual connections. And on the opposite of that, the third house, we're still traveling, we're still moving around, but it's more closer to our immediate environment, it's our neighborhoods, it's our radio stations, it's our TV shows and the stories we tell. Our childhood friends live here. This is where we went to elementary school, kind of thing. Um, and this is, where children look to expand their development in the third house. Usually, as adults, we are probably trying to take in more information about things that we just weren't um, aware that were happening in our sphere. So, when we step out on our front door, those are the local governments. Those are, you're not voting for the president, you're voting for your mayor, you're voting for your district representatives. And so that's kind of the delineation. Um, and yeah, there's that. So, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody want to say anything? I've just been talking at you. I apologize.
I'm so fascinated with all of this only because I don't have like a sun. I have uh, the axis, the Jupiter Gemini axis in my nodes in 6 and 12. And so it's super fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad that you feel sparked by this conversation and your little planetary alignments are like, whoa, this is exciting. So, I was going to do Jupiter through the houses, but that doesn't make sense. Let's do Jupiter through the signs. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, are you guys able to see this chart here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate you. Okay. Just give me. Okay. So, or Jupiter in the first house, there is a very high level of enthusiasm. This person is pretty much unstoppable, you know. There's many triumphs and hardships to kind of let this person know um, what they need in order to keep going towards the mark. When I think of Aries, I think of the ram head, of being able to charge forward head first. And if they fall, they get right back up. And so this is not a Jupiter that is a stoppable Jupiter. You have to physically stop these people. Um, they have the ability to reinvent themselves many times. So they'll look different. They'll kind of change their style of dress. Lots of different hairstyles. Um, and they are looking to expand the knowledge of themselves and others. Um, their beliefs are pretty cutting edge. They're extremely talented and free-willed. Um, and they're really trying to authentically be themselves, kind of really learning how to do that in this lifetime with this Jupiter. So, you know, the sad thing is, people aren't always on board with our beliefs and what we have to say. And so, Jupiter in Aries or Jupiter in the first house person will feel that tension. Because when we're authentically ourselves, you have to kind of walk in this world, not being feared of not being liked. Being liked is not something that is on their minds. So when there is a transit happening in the first house, or when Jupiter is in Aries and it's transiting over some part of your natal chart, it's generally a time to reinvent the way things look. And it's growing growing one's willpower, so that, there's a level of stamina that can be attained. So if a person has Jupiter I'm gonna just close this out because that's not making any sense. Okay, so if one has Jupiter in Taurus or Jupiter in the second house, these people really love extending their pleasures, the simple things in life that like just bring natural creature comforts. I mean, that is blasted. These people are entertainers when it comes to providing a beautiful spread of food. Being able to taste all the flavors, seeing all of the colors. These people are very colorful people. They have a level of talents and gifts that are really highlighted when Jupiter is here. I mean, the gifts and talents are enormous to the point where there's nothing that they won't try to just do themselves. Taurus is a very independent sign. And so they're just like, oh, I don't need anybody else. I can do this. I can figure this out. And so this inner teacher is like really trying to be their only resource. So you've got the cook, and you've got the graphic designer, and you've got the bottler, and all of these people are making up, one person selling hot sauce. My brother in particular, my brother has a Jupiter in Taurus, and he makes this lovely hot sauce that has to be fermented, and it takes a long time for it to process. And in the meantime, he's making delicious foods, and really like expanding the way that we look at food from all different kinds of cultures. And so when we had this experience with him, I don't think I stopped eating since then. That was about 2 years ago. It's just we have the ability to get larger during these transits with Jupiter, um, and kind of bust our pants. But there's also an ability of like coming into a large sum of money at one point, or a promise of that, um, a love and a deep love for silence and being alone. These people really relish in the peace and quiet of themselves, and can love it so much that they will isolate themselves in order to just extend that feeling of comfort, because these people can be um, or like just kind of slower moving processes instead of rushing through everything. You can't rush any Taurus archetype. So, these people have a love for the arts and poetry and singing and painting. These are very artistic people. And there's a challenge here. There's a challenge with Jupiter in Taurus, or Jupiter in the second house, which is like knowing when enough is enough. When it's too much consumption, too much spending, too much eating, too much sex, and just, that's we as humans, we just love to extend those things. There's nothing wrong with it. We just have to learn when enough is enough. And these people um, have a really deep relationship with that. You can talk to them, and they'll have really deep stories about how they've had a love affair with something that wasn't right for them, something that, comforted them for a time, and then it turned toxic and they'd have to let it go. So, when you're having a transit with in the second house with Jupiter there, or Jupiter is in Taurus, there's a time to reinvent the connections to the senses. So it's kind of like tampering things down a little bit. It's not having all of the things at once, the sweet, the salt, the sugar. It's kind of singling things out, simplifying things, and just really getting truthful with our levels of consumption and our confidence, our self-confidence. Um, what Jupiter's trying to grow through Taurus is a steady, consistent life where we're not too extreme with the things, that we're malleable and we can move, but we're more consistent here, and have a good routine. So when Jupiter is in Gemini, or Jupiter is in the third house, there is a need for expanding the reach and availability of information that's changing, that's always needing to be updated. It evolves, and is in line with the trends, is street smart. This Jupiter placement has like dynamic charisma. I mean, these people are very charismatic. They have the ability to sway people to believe into their ideologies very easy because they've got all the knowledge. They have all the pieces of information that you would need to make a good informed decision about. Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes they can be flippant, or they can seem flippant, with this Jupiter and Gemini, because we're taking in different things all the time. There's a level of committing to one thing that just doesn't want to happen. I don't want to commit to this one form of thought process. There's many different kinds, and I need to know more information about all of those, so I can't really commit myself to one. Um, and so, you know, there's kind of like, we talked about, um, they can have a stifled mentality, sometimes about differing cultures or blended belief systems. So, you know, um, these people can be kind of staunch in the fact that there's like a level of separation. This is black, this is white, this is USA, this is Canada. And so there's a lot of delineation with Jupiter and Gemini. Jupiter is in Gemini right now. So as we can see the world events, there is a level of separation that's happening. We're all kind of congealing to the groups and the ideologies and the thought processes that define us. These categories that could be old, that could be, doesn't seem so aligned to be so black and white about things, to be so left or right about things, but they just are that way. And it's kind of hard to get past that. Because I think what we're all trying to understand is where we come from. If we think about the third house, we think about our immediate environments and our schooling and our childhood friendships. That's going back to the basics, right? That's going back to what we were taught about ourselves, how we learned to identify ourselves, what bubble we select when it comes to race and ethnicity. So this is a big conversation of the level of intolerance we're seeing for difference with this Jupiter and Gemini. If the Jupiter was in Sagittarius, this tolerance would be high. There would be a lot of acceptance, but with Jupiter and Gemini, we're experiencing the separation and the duality of things. So when there is a transit happening, so if Jupiter is passing the third house or whatnot, there can be a need to expand your reality by learning the reality of others. So it's, getting to know your neighbors more. It's getting to understand the inner workings of how people are moving around you. It's assessing. Um, it's assessing the fact that not all of us live the same, and that we have to open up, and we have to learn about other people, and to not be singular focused or so black and white. Sometimes there's a gray area, and that's what Gemini wants to understand, but it's very hard. And so what they're growing with this Jupiter is their mental process. They're growing their mind, and they're growing their mentality, because that's essentially all that they're moving with. All they care about is making sure that this mind is able to make good informed decisions, able to talk to people and move around and lead. So if Jupiter is in Cancer, or if you have Jupiter in the fourth house, you can have a love for expanding a sense of belonging and understanding your own emotional processes. These people need time to process their emotions. They need time to let things run its course, so they cannot be rushed. With the Jupiter in Cancer, they're coming in this life to seek the comfort and trust of and stability of their home and family connections, which is a really big one for all of us. You know, we all desire that and need it. It's a fundamental need in order for healthy development. But with the Jupiter in Cancer, they're learning to explore that on the deepest level. So, there's, you know, um, a need to look at one's emotional maturity and the reactions that we have to life. So, um, Cancer can represent our reactions, our first emotional reaction to life, or to a situation, to something that's shocking, something that moves our emotions. And so, these people have a very deep connection to their ancestral roots, and where they come from, where they belong to, what people they belong to. So there's a high level of almost nationalism in their blood. Um, they had, just because they have strong ties to their places of origin. So I'm not saying that I'm talking about a specific group in particular. I'm talking about just people who are very supportive and staunch and those types of words towards the place that they live. Um, so if just for reference, America, it was, founded and established during Cancer season. And if you observe the American way, if you are an American, you're very staunch about it. You are very nationalistic about it with the flags and the I'm never leaving this country and I don't need a passport. And so that's kind of that's kind of those types of ideas around nationalism. So these people are growing emotionally. They are very connected to their emotions, but maybe trying to grow the emotional stability and trust within themselves, trust in others. Um, yeah. So Jupiter in Leo, or Jupiter in the fifth house. So there's a love for expanding and learning, the need to be in that creative flow. With Jupiter and Leo, there's always some kind of belief around children, what they need. Um, and even as far as, the people who don't have children, they either work with the inner child or they're working in the name of children. So their service towards them is pretty apparent. Um, They do things in a very unique way. We're talking about fire signs, so they're not going with the status quo and what other people are doing. And so this Jupiter in Leo is searching for, the underserved, what isn't seen. They're seeing things that there's a small fraction of people who aren't getting their needs met in this way. And so I need to step in and make sure that I step in for that. Also, Jupiter and Leo will shine their light through the dark. So, if you are having or have fallen on hard times, these people can really make you feel amazing. Can really make you feel like a special person. When they speak to you, they speak to a lot of different parts of you. Um, they're warm and um, it's kind of this reciprocal conversation of um, understanding who we are at a child level and as an adult level, and kind of how to mix and match that to live a full life. So when a transit is coming through, so say Jupiter is in Leo or Jupiter is passing through your fifth house, it's a time for play, creativity, having a new hairstyle. Dealing with issues surrounding, children and childhood dynamics. I was in a study group today, and one of my classmates was talking about how Saturn was passing through her fifth house, and she really didn't want to get pregnant again, and really tried everything possible. And then she had a nephew. The nephew came to live with her for a whole year. And so, so Saturn came, so did that little child, and she took care of him until Saturn moved into her sixth house, and then he went home. So there is some significance of, planets transiting this house. And with Jupiter there, I would assume that, there could be still this level of, expanding childhood, maybe a very fertile time to grow one's family or to want to have children. And so Jupiter in Leo is growing the creativity, growing creatively. I notice that these people often don't have um, a large creative life. Their lives can be very practical. And that's why they're given this Jupiter. They're saying, hey, not every part of life is about practicality. Some of it is just about enjoyment. And so this Jupiter is really pushing them to understand that. And that's why they have such a close connection with children, because it just immediately pops them into understanding, that true nature. So if there's Jupiter in Virgo or Jupiter in the sixth house, there's a love for expanding function and other daily functions in life to make them perfect, pristine, refined. Virgos like the way that things look and feel, the textures, and the level of detail that a Jupiter in Virgo will have is stunning. You will walk into their environment and you'll notice that, there's kind of a story with each implement that they've added, and it's got a soft and warmness to it. That's pretty lovely. They're diligent, they're intelligent, they manage people really well. They can become controlled because they kind of have this like rigid belief system only because they know it works. If it didn't work, then they'd be like, okay, back to the drawing board, because we don't do anything that doesn't work. And that's what it's trying to get across to this person, that there is this heavy need for perfection, but also that there is a need to embrace things that aren't perfect. So there's almost like when Jupiter comes around in this sign, we have to drop the perfection and we just have to do it anyways. Because dropping the level of perfection, dropping our level of control about things allows movement and opportunity to reach us in different ways. So, with when we're having a transit, so if the transit of Jupiter is happening through your sixth house, or if Jupiter is in Virgo at the time, there will be an evolution to the health or work related matters. So, we'd be focused on pretty much improving the day to day and making sure that that is tip top. And Jupiter in Virgo is growing our levels of functionality in all of the mundane parts of our lives, from waking up and brushing our teeth to, going to the dentist and making sure that our teeth are cleaned, from beginning to end. So when Jupiter is in Libra, or if you have Jupiter in the seventh house, it's a love for expanding what's beautiful and what's moral and what creates a level of abundance, and balance, but also justice. They have this keen ability to see the other side of a story or a situation, almost live it. To be able to hear a story, imagine the storyline, and maybe put themselves in the driver's seat and go, whoa, wow, what a relatable story, These people are constantly learning and adapting because they are trying to accept and understand other points of view. This makes them highly educated and informative people. They make really amazing teachers, people to help us learn about ourselves, or, people who have like a really great life story. Um, and through their experiences, we get that experience too. Like, oh, you went over there, I went over there too. Um, and so there's this essence of kind of allowing things to come to you. When we talked about Jupiter in Aries, we talked about, ramming the head and ramming it. And, if you fall down, you'll just get back up again and you'll try again. You've got this really hard head, this exterior, these horns that are protecting you. When we're at the opposite of that with Jupiter in Libra, it's not about going the Aries way. It's about letting things come to you. And we're not banging our heads. We're not going with free will. We're letting things come to us because we're being sought out. We're not having to go seek that out. So there's a level of um, you know growing and expanding through relationships. And like I said, when we allow things to come to us, when we allow relationships to come, and we um, are geared towards learning about the other person, um, we tend to we tend to be multifaceted. And that's why when when we talk about Libra and Scorpio, we talk about the psychology of a person. Um, and there's been some really amazing psychologists, and other thought leaders that have these signatures because they really like to grow relationally. Um, Life is more fun when we're together, that type of mentality. So when Jupiter is in Scorpio, or when Jupiter is in the eighth house, there is a love for expanding or bringing light to what needs our direct attention. There's a deep inner reflection and the need to know oneself on the utmost level. I mean, stripping the layers of the onion is this Jupiter in Scorpio. It can be an intense time, it can be a very potent placement. These people can be very transformative, very inspired, very empowering, and also can inspire others to be empowered. Is what I'm meaning to say. Um, this is kind of an addictive um, Jupiter. This is the kind of Jupiter that you couldn't have just remember when they used to have Pringles, you can't have just one, or you can't have just one cigarette, or you can't, like, this is the kind of Jupiter that would turn into this addiction, this thing that I can't let go of, this deep love affair. Um, and addiction, even in, like, there's a particular person or experience and it's all consuming, it's something that you crave, it's something that you feel you can't live without. And so you can kind of live in that needing and that craving, um, or just that feeling of extending those good feelings, like Taurus does for us. It extends the good feelings, but Scorpio reminds us that those good things do end. Um, Actually, they need to come to an end, or we'll get lost. We'll die off. We'll lose all of our energy. So, um, Jupiter and Scorpio people are deeply private. They're provocative, they're willing to have the hard conversations, the taboo discussions, the talks about sex. Um, and when there's a transit happening, when Jupiter is passing over your eighth house or Jupiter is in Scorpio, it's a time for working with the shadow and bringing matters to light. So, as Carl Jung, pointed out to us in, oh, I forget it. Here it is. There's no coming to consciousness without pain. That is, that's what that is. That's that Jupiter in Scorpio. That we can't come to a higher level of knowledge or experiencing ourselves until we've run into the pain and we know that we can overcome it. When Jupiter is in, okay, one last thing. So Jupiter in Scorpio means that we're growing psychologically. When we are driving through the terrains of our shadow and our past and the things that don't feel so great and the things that have disappointed us, we come to a realization of how strong and powerful and resilient we are. And that kind of gives us a different psychological awareness, and can sometimes make us happy, that the pain occurred. I mean, it's not always serendipitous, but there can be a high level of appreciation for these types of changes because the level of evolution, the level of psychological growth can be huge. I remember having Jupiter transit my eighth house. It was not fun. You know, people talk about Jupiter being a really great time when it's transiting the house and brings all these positive things. It doesn't always. But what I will say is it was the deepest shadow work I think I've ever done in my life. It looked disgusting. It felt disgusting in terms of just how low I felt and how out of energy and how out of it I felt. And I have Jupiter in the eighth house natally. So when I was having that Jupiter return, it was just mm, monumental. Could never go back. I'm fully transformed after that situation. And I never have to deal with those situations again because I faced them. And I faced them for as long as they would face me. So, Jupiter in Scorpio. When Jupiter is in Sagittarius, there's a love for expanding life through constant study and, you know, this constant flux of knowledge. Um, you know, reading different books and uh, studying different ways of living, um, documenting or listening to other people who have different accounts of living. They're enthusiastic about what they're learning and they're excited to share it with others. They become the philosopher, um, and they will teach and serve what they learn. So a lot of times when there's this signature, it's like everything that I take in and that sits with me becomes my resource, becomes my knowledge, but then it becomes my higher level of service that I'm offering, and that I'm making sure that people have access to. So yeah, there's a high level of needing to make sure that other people obtain the knowledge that and the experiences that they had. So again, great storytellers. And if there's a transit happening over the ninth house with Jupiter, or if Jupiter is in Sagittarius, it's like a wake-up call to learn something, to explore through the world, travel, through looking at different films and documentaries and traveling to different spaces that allow you to grow culturally. So Jupiter and Sagittarius is growing um, that cultural muscle so that you know you do know what happened in Africa in the 1950s instead of only knowing what's happening in your country. That's kind of the idea there. So if we're talking about Jupiter in Capricorn or Jupiter in the 10th house, these people have a love for expanding the rules and laws around what's right and wrong. Expanding them doesn't mean necessarily following them. It means blowing them out. It means, okay, you said this was the rule, so I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna see if you remember your own rule. I'm gonna see if there's a new level, a new stage, a new development that we can reach with this. I'm gonna change that standard. as what they're coming to do. There's a strong moral ethic, and they need to see strong, credible people in their lives in order to feel safe. I mean, most of us do, but these people, most definitely. Um, and it's because, there's always reasons why we are having these spiritual experiences in these bodies. Um, but I think that the reason why this person is born with Jupiter and Saturn is because they often become the strong, credible people that feel safe to be around in response. So they don't get it, but then they become that because they have to for themselves, and they do it from a very young age. These people are generally forced into maturity um, way faster than they should have to. Their emotions are generally not addressed. When we think about Capricorn, we can remember that Cancer is the opposite. So if we're getting all the love and attention and nurturing through Cancer, we can imagine through Capricorn that's going to be less, that there's going to be a need for that. And so these people tend to be, the first siblings sometimes with a Capricorn sun. Um, and, it's because these people are really consistent. They're driven, they're ambitious. Um, they're able to provide a sturdy foundation to most aspects of life. I mean, the level of practicality is high. The level of knowing what works and what doesn't, because they've kind of teetered on that fence their whole lives. They're going to be able to tell you whether you can or cannot, get your driver's license um, with particular parameters or what have you. They're going to know what you can and can't do. So when there is a transit in the 10th house with Jupiter, or if there's Jupiter in Capricorn, it's a time for establishing a strong foundation. It's a time for being more diligent and more disciplined with one's, daily actions. Um, and what this Jupiter is trying to grow in this person is recognition. Recognition for, all the hard work that they've put in. A lot of times when people are the support or the foundation or the structure, a lot of times it still gets covered up. And everybody else's names and faces go on the product, but there's still someone in the background. And that's this Jupiter in Capricorn. And, all the parts of the project need to have a voice. And so this recognition becomes very important for these people. Doesn't matter what part they play, just as long as they're seen as an integral part of how things move. All right, last two. Jupiter in Aquarius. So with Jupiter in Aquarius, there is a love for expanding and elevating the human condition. Like we talked about, Aquarius is the first human on the astrological wheel, first fully formed human. And what makes a human different from an animal is being able to stand upright. And that uprightedness comes through the ankles. So Sagittarius represents the ankles, having the ability to move and flex with the feet, practical, mentally driven. They have a strong desire to bring people of marginalized groups to a better understanding, better alignment, more access. They're the people that see deficiencies and see when a community has not been served properly. They are more geared towards technological advances, technology in particular. These people will be very good at telling you, how to use your Zoom, how to use your computer programs. And, they're really going to be into, everybody deserves healthcare. Everybody deserves, access to, um, you know, when I think of accessibility, I think of, people who are disabled or who are not able-bodied in particular senses. So, why should why should someone have to watch a video and they're hearing impaired and not be able to have subtitles or an interpreter, or a way for them to access that knowledge. And so Jupiter in Aquarius becomes very rigid with making sure that this becomes solved. And so they may create groups or collate groups, or become a person who brings people together that are, having higher levels of thinking when it comes to, our mentality and who we follow. And, how do we have a more human, more civilized experience of life? These people can overthink and self-doubt themselves to death, can be very unsure with their with their mental process, because it can be inundating. It can be critical and analytical. And sometimes when we are not properly getting out the stuff in our minds, they can take over, and they tend to not be nice. People say the mind is not your friend, your heart is. So, anyways, so I would like to say that this Jupiter is growing accessibility, growing the human existence. So Jupiter in Pisces, or Jupiter passing through the 12th house, it's a love or a need for expanding a compassionate viewpoint. It's to see, everyone is equal, to see no separateness, to not see that black or white, but to realize that there's probably 50 shades between black and white. The ability to not take things too personally, to be more even-tempered and, more neutral. It's the peace, not war kind of analogy. These people are imaginative. They're able to tap into their creative current of the natural flow. So they are, really great musicians, really great at collating music and, putting their imagination on paper. These people are great at that. When we are having a transit over the 12th house, or Jupiter is in Pisces, it's a time for going with the flow and allowing faith, our own faith and beliefs, to take control. And, uncertainty and a view of more compassion for oneself and others. So when we're following life, when we're following our faith, it's because we have to at some point, the ability to have all of this knowledge and have all of these spiritual practices. And, I can be an astrologer and still not know how everything is going to pan out exactly. Like, there's no tool that we have to know. And so at some point, when we're taking risks, when we're taking leaps of faith, we we have to just go with it, and see what the outcome will be. So Jupiter in Pisces kind of gives that level of growing compassion for ourselves and for others in this like turbulent life of, making decisions that feel uncertain and just kind of riding the wheel and hoping we did it, hoping we were guided in the right way. So our first influential person is Jeffrey Wolf Green. He is, I say, the co-founder of Evolutionary Astrology because there's all kinds of debates between these men about who said the word evolutionary astrology first. So Jeffrey is here on the right. Stephen Forrest is here on the left, and Stephen Forrest is an evolutionary astrologer during our currently in our current times. And I stumbled on some weird article that he wrote on his website about who actually said the word first. And it was some other gentleman in the 1970s. So he basically just said, evolutionary astrology doesn't belong to me. It's any kind of astrology that marries modern psychology with ancient metaphysics. I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. I liked that analogy. So There weren't very many photos of Jeffrey. He was a very private kind of person. He has a lot of Scorpio there, as you can see. And, so I had to put them two together because they did do some great works with one another. So he studied psychology and spirituality before coming to astrology. And he was a traveler. He traveled all over the United States to different bookshops, to different reading events, and he would talk about what he thought about Pluto. Pluto was his main breakout. Pluto and the nodes of the moon basically denoted to him that there was a past life experience. Um, and I have one quote here. One quote. He says that a lot of his work was brought to him through meditations and through dreams. And so um, he he had a spiritual relationship. So I don't know if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, but there are many excerpts in there where there's this person having a spiritual experience with another person who's not physically there. And so he speaks about Yogananda as if the two of them had this very personal, close relationship. He said he dedicated his very first Pluto book to Paramahansa Yogananda, whose love, care, forgiveness, and guidance inspired this work. And he also dedicates it to No Till, who is an amazing astrologer. But I remember hearing a bunch of different stories about how he was brought to teach about evolutionary astrology, and it was very much like Yogananda had explained about his situation in Autobiography of a Yogi. So both Jeffrey Wolf Green, and Yogananda loved this spiritual teacher, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and he said this Swami that was, inspirational to Yogananda, that helped him develop himself highly and spiritually, is here in Jeffrey's book. It says, "A child is born on that day and at that hour when the celestial rays are in mathematical harmony with his individual karma. His horoscope is a challenging portrait, revealing his unalterable past and its probable future result. But the natal chart can be rightly interpreted only by the men of intuitive wisdom. These are few." So right here we can see that he's blended Eastern and Western ideologies together in order to bring a level of awareness to our consciousness. He talks about consciousness in his work. He introduces, evolutionary astrology, capital E, capital A, as a process in the late 1970s, and talks a lot about, the soul's journey through lifetimes, and Pluto as the evolutionary journey of the soul. He uses Pluto to understand the karmic patterns and soul evolution. So this is his process. This is not law. And people use different planets for karma. Actually, people use Saturn for karma a lot. So it's just a different way of thinking. So he published his first book, Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, in '84, and that was basically his stepping stone to create what is now what we call evolutionary astrology. We do all kind of give him the credit, because most of us have read these books, these really old, tattered, used books from the '80s, and they hit us somewhere. They hit us home. And so we go searching for his students. So my teacher, Maurice Fernandez, was a student of Jeffrey Wolf Green, and many others. And I can't say that the way that Maurice teaches us is the same as Jeffrey teaches his students. It is evolved and quite different. But for the most part, we all have this deep understanding with Pluto, and Scorpio and the nodes of the moon. So if we can look at his birth chart here, he's got Sun in Sagittarius on the node of the moon, on the south node. So right there, that shows us that he has, according to evolutionary astrology terms, he has a past life signature with this Sagittarius. He's been here before. He's done this very particular thing before. And if we look at the north node, we see Uranus is right there. So Uranus, Uranus is the planet of, elevation and information, informing people so that they can get out of that rat-infested apartment and, move into a nice clean home. It's the placement that lets us know that we need to be more aligned in our life so that we can have better things. We deserve better things. And so, you know, Uranus also represents astrology. So does the sign of Aquarius. So just in the signature alone, his sun, Uranus, and the nodes of the moon, with our teachings, we can assume that this person has done this before, who knows this work, which is why it just popped up on him spiritually, right? But he's got Jupiter. He's got Jupiter in the 12th house, along with Chiron. And so through his dreams, his master showed himself to him. In the darkness, he was brought light. And he was told, you have to teach this. This is something important that people should know about. People need to know about evolving themselves, and that astrology isn't about just the positive aspects of life and what we're going to do from day to day. It's about how do we grow our soul? How do we allow ourselves to fully blossom and bloom? How do we create a sense of wholeness to our psychology, to our psyche? And that's really what he wanted to bring to the table. So good old Jeffrey, thanks, buddy. We love you. We don't see him today. He actually disappeared in 2006, and I'm sure only his closest people know if he's still alive or not. I do know that they have the School of Evolutionary Astrology by Jeffrey Wolf Green, and those are a different level of or a different group of people, not level, just different people. And they learned his process, and his daughter has been releasing his work and making sure that all of his transcripts get published. So it's really nice to have a legacy and someone who also cares about it. So Britney Spears, I have been obsessed with this gal since I was young. Since I was in high school. Her first single came out, Hit Me Baby One More Time. And I remember being in the car with my mom and her being okay with this song. Like she really let me get into it. There was this level of feeling like it was okay to be a wild girl, and my mom was gonna let me do that. Um, so she had this really great influence on younger women, and really brought this Venusian aspect to us. Like, oh, she's extremely feminine, extremely talented, very beautiful, able to do it all. And that changed things. She was, kind of higher up. They considered her the princess of pop. So she was raised in Louisiana. She was raised in a very small town, which is very hard for Sagittarian people. And she had to figure out a way to get out of that small town. And she knew at 3 she was going to have to figure out how to get herself out. So she used all of her natural talents, all of her gifts. She's got Uranus here, the second house of skills and gifts and talents. So, she's working with something here, but Also, she has Chiron in the eighth house. So the skills and talents of Taurus, um, they become a blessing and a curse. They become something that she absolutely needs, but then can rip her down if not the cards aren't played right. So at 11, she joined the Mickey Mouse Club. I loved her on that show. I watched it a lot. Um, and her childhood was marked by a really complicated family life. You know, they came from humble beginnings, trailer parks, not having a whole lot. And she knew that if she excelled, then she could bring her whole family with her. So that was just kind of her whole mentality. If I make it, my family makes it. So it was this constant pressure to keep going. Her mom made sure that she um, could support her ambitions, helping her attend auditions, helping her move to New York. Um, and so this moon in the fifth house, this mother was super supportive of her daughter at a young age. She knew that her daughter was special and unique at some point. And so she really adored her mom for seeing her, for understanding that she was a creative individual and trying to figure out ways to get them out of their situation. Um, but she ends up making so much money from 99 to 2016. She made around $700 million from touring all over the world nonstop, from nonstop shows back to back year after year in Las Vegas. I mean, it was rough, but there were times in between where, she ran into divorces and custody battles. And, she's got to pay people, and she's, got all of these expenses and all these people on the payroll. And then over time, she gets put into a conservatorship because the people around her thought she was too wild. She was going to lose everything. And so her father put her under this conservatorship and pretty much ruled her finances and her whole career. She was not allowed to make not one decision for herself. She wasn't allowed to drive her own car. She had a specific allowance. And she mentioned that these were the hardest times of her life. She did it for a whole Jupiter cycle for 12 years, 12 to 13 years. She dealt with these levels of power play. She's got Jupiter in, excuse me, sorry, one moment. She's got Jupiter in Scorpio in that first house. So already we can see that at some level, she's got to empower herself and take something back that belongs to her. And her free will and her ability to say yes or no, to have her own life and independence, that was completely taken from her. And so this conservatorship lasted from 2008 to 2021. And over time, she expressed that this conservatorship was not good for her, because she was afraid. They pumped her full of fear. So that's why Sagittarius can represent fear, because there is a level of unknown, right? And if you're getting your information from sources that are not good, that don't have your intentions set at the highest standpoint, then you're going to have a lot of fears that are unwarranted. So she kind of feared that anytime she would make a move, she would get sued or someone would take more money from her. Um, I think, she's paid lawyers upwards of $3 million in serving her case for the past 12 years. A lot of people have made money off of the back of this woman. And she is unfortunately currently, um, you know, by our standards, this is a lot of money, but her net worth is only worth 40 million, and it's dwindling. It's because she's not able to earn. She wasn't given the time, uh, the, the, the proper time to like process what she was going through, constantly working. constantly being this extreme gal who's like influencing everybody and doing what she's supposed to do. But she's not having a teenage existence. She's not going to the movies with her friends and dating normal boys at school. There's something else that's happening. And so when you rush people to that development, where they have to kind of shut off all of their natural uh, ways about themselves, it will eventually come out in the end. And so that's kind of where she is right now. It's unfortunate. She's no longer on this high pedestal. Her money's dwindling, and she's, showing her body on Instagram, and just, you know, I feel for her. And she didn't have a whole lot of people around her that would support her properly. And so it's unfortunate that we have to see the unraveling of what happens when someone isn't provided, safety, and to be able to trust the people around her. I think pretty much every man that was in her life tried to make sure that they were on her payroll. I watched a documentary, and it was just man after man, trying to control how much money she got, who she could see. It was just, it was unreal. So the Sagittarius, Mercury, and Uranus and Sun in Sagittarius, this is so powerful. She was a force to be reckoned with, and was able to really give her talent without any limits. She just gave until she didn't have anything left, and she did that with all aspects of her life. And I hope that she is doing okay. I watch her on the socials, and wish for her to have a happy, healthy life. And the last person we'll talk about is Osho. So Osho is the philosopher, the mystic. They call him the sex guru, and he calls himself a sun encouraging the flower to open. He's a sun in the seventh house. So right there, we already know that this is a relational guy. He needs to have people in his corner. He needs to have many different kinds of experiences. He needs people to tell them about their stories and about what they're going through. So, his development early in life, he was very geared towards philosophy and psychology, and so that's what he studied. And what's really interesting, that he mentioned that his grandmother was the one that raised him. So I do see a connection with Jupiter and one's grandparents. And so his Jupiter is in the third house in Leo. And he mentioned that his grandmother had no limits. She said he could just do whatever he wanted. He could run in and out. She just didn't care. And he lived with her until he was 8. He later then got kind of preoccupied with his grandfather's death and the death of a friend. And that kind of really sparked this idea of impermanence, the human condition, what it means to be held down by societal thought processes, when you're living a life and you could just die tomorrow. So you can see that he has a lot of placements here in the eighth house, this connection to death, this learning hardships through someone leaving this realm. He experienced a spiritual transformation at 21, and left his post as a philosopher at the college in order to travel India and to proselytize his ideologies. So, right away, he had a knowledge about what was happening in the world and felt like everybody needed to know about it. And so he made sure that was something that he could do. But over time in the 80s, he really wanted to expand into a bigger market. And, in the early 70s, people started to catch on that if they came to America, they could sway those belief systems because we're looking for, higher levels of spiritual connection and credibility. And, we've got Christianity that rules this land. However, not all of us believe in that. And so we're in constant seek for something different. And so when these yogis came over here, it was like the world opened up. East versus West is so different in terms of how one should live a life or how one does live a life. So he created an ashram in Wasco, California. Wasco? Yeah. Oregon, in 1981. We drove through one day. It's a beautiful area. Um, and basically it was just the center of controversy. It seems like it could have been good for some people, but a lot of their accounts they were confused. There was a lot of rituals and um, things around, having sex with each other and in front of one another, and to not have any emotional response and to switch partners. And so he was really trying to reorient and restructure the way people think about sex, because he believed that people's sexual connection, once they kind of let that free roam, then they become their truest selves. Um, and, over time, they started to get more extreme. And, Sheila, his assistant, did some damning things. And, they eventually had to, uh, the local authorities came to investigate the fact that his personal secretary um, uh, was involved in the mass shooting, or excuse me, a mass food poisoning attack. Um, it was intended to influence the county elections, um, an aborted assassination plot against Charles H. Turner, and the attempted murder of Rajneesh's personal physician. So, some of his followers and his own personal secretary were trying to take over the area that they inhabited. They took over the town, they pissed off the locals. It was terrible. He ended up getting deported, get sent back, um, and, he was denied entry into 21 countries after being deported in 85. So he was only here for 4 years, and a lot of his teachings are still running through our mainstream. They're still uh, viable, they're still useful. Um, whether you believe in his approaches or not, um, they work. They have the ability to work. I remember participating, I was in Kundalini yoga teacher training, and we had this one day where we had to do dynamic meditation, which is what Osho calls his yoga. And the dynamic yoga is movements that are irregular. It is no limitation on your voice, so you can scream, you can cry. There's no light in the room, and you're allowed to express in any way that you want. And I remember this still in my mind being one of the most profound experiences I ever had. To not only witness my own darkness, but to be in a room with a bunch of people who are dealing with their own, and you could hear what they were dealing with. And it really brought us closer together. So I can't really vouch for, all of his practices, but some of them are still relevant for discovering the shadow. So